Hi everyone, welcome to my room. Delighted to see you guys. Before I begin this video, let me remind you that I have written a book on the INFJ type, and it's the most in-depth study of the INFJ ever conducted. It's available in the description box down below. You just click, you can get it on as an ebook or as a paperback for less than $10. So give it a go. People are loving it so far. The book looks gorgeous. Thank you for your support. Now, I wanted to react to this new study, relatively new study that's been published according to a video by Frank James that I suspect many among you have already seen, but I will still link it in the description as well so that you can have a look at the video, where the results of this study essentially, so we'll say, because the dates are a little bit confusing, but we'll say that the study was released around the year 2020. This is a study on the rarity of types, or the commonness of types. And what turns out is that according to the results of the study, the INFJ is no longer the number one. What are we going to do, guys? We're no longer number ones, we're number three, with roughly 2.93% of the population instead of the former 1.5. Now, the ENFJ is more rare with, around 2.3, 2.4% of the population, which is kind of the same result it got back in 2000 at the time of the previous and first study. And now place number one, first place, is held by the ENTJ with 1.8%, the same percentage as in 2000, more or less. So ENTJ is number one, INFJ is number three. What are we to make of it? Are we going to have an existential crisis? Are we going to stop being INFJs? What is going to happen? But more importantly, what does this mean? What does this mean? How are we to interpret these results? So what I would say in the first place is this. It seems to me that there are some people who think that the population in 20 years has evolved in such a way that now, like, the number of ENTJs and ENFJs is more or less the same, but for some reason there are massively more introverts, more thinkers and feelers, more INFJs than there used to be, blah, 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 blah. Like, that's not a realistic way of looking at the picture, guys. It's not a realistic way of looking at the picture simply because in 20 years, that's just one generation. The fabric of society cannot evolve so quickly. There cannot be like a type that at the level of the planet is just twice as common as it was 20 years before. It makes sense, right? People are just 20 years younger. Most people, were alive at the time. A lot of people are born. Some of them may have taken the test, sure, but it's not enough to just lead to such a massive change. So what the new study reveals or purports to reveal is not this. It's simply to say, now in 2020 we have a more accurate representation of the typological population than was the case in 2000s. We have just devised a more scientific approach, a more scientific method to get those more accurate results. So it's not the case that INFJs used to be the rarest and now ENTJs are. Is that really ENTJs always were the rarest, but it's just that now the study is more reliable. What are we to make of this? Personally, my thought on it is to be very, very cautious, and I would say skeptical of the results that we are looking at. Because let's not forget that these results are still based on self-reports at the end of the day. And what does self-reporting mean? It means that it's always liable to being influenced by what a person wishes to be, right? And in this respect, no matter how much more expansive and scientific and blah the new study is, the study that that came out 20 years after the first one, no matter all these variables that are at the end of the day on the margins of making it more scientific, there's one massive variable that is missing and that the first study has, and it is the fact that the first study was the first study. So people were not at the time projecting wanting to be of a particular type. They had no incentive to want to be in a particular type. And so the bias that comes with wanting to be and projecting being of another type didn't exist in as nearly as powerful a measure as in this new report. So that's an important point, specifically from the perspective of the results that are given for the rarest types. Why did INFJ shift? Why was the INFJ type demoted from number one rarest to number three rarest? I'm going to give you one hypothesis, which I sincerely believe is true, but will not be proven now. It's more like in the form of a prediction for the next report, which will hopefully come out in 20 or 25 years, or whenever that is. And this is my prediction, and then I'll explain why I'm making this prediction. I'm predicting that in 2040 or whenever that is for the next report, ENTJ will no longer be the most rare type. ENTJ will actually probably be about twice as common as it is now. So instead of being 1.8%, it'll probably be around 3.5%. INFJs will no longer be quite as common, but it will still not be back to its 1.5% percentage. So it could well end up being still number 3 or back to number 2. Back to number 2 sounds reasonable. And then number 1 will probably be ENFJ. Because the ENFJ type is the only type of those 3 that people do not have a particular incentive to want to type as in their self-typing. They'll still have a bit of an incentive for INFJ because it still will carry a status as the rarest type for quite a while. For the transition to the ENTJ type as the rarest, for the ENTJ type to get that status for itself, it will be a process that solidifies over a certain amount of time. It will nevertheless happen that the ENTJ will gain that status. And that status is very important. Note that it is extraneous to the type. Nothing about the INFJ is intrinsically superior to the other type. If it is the rarest, or when it is seen as the rarest, is something that it gets as a label, but it gives it a great deal of value because a valuable resource, as you know, tends to be a resource that's scarce. It's a resource that's rare. And also it provides an explanatory pathway for understanding or justifying oneself and not being understood by others, rather than questioning yourself, asking yourself, maybe there's something that I could be changing in my approach or whatever. It can be a useful expedient, if not always a healthy one, to say, well, it's because I'm misunderstood, I'm so unique. So you explain your frustrations and you have the valuable status of being the rarest. Some INFJs who are really INFJs fall for that as well. By no means all of them, but some of them do. Now that status is still sticking to the INFJ and is simply the reason why so many people who are not INFJs this time around self-typed as INFJ, because they wanted to be the rarest. They wanted to have all those privileges that INFJs have. The ironical outcome of this is that by wanting to be INFJs, they contributed to making INFJ no longer the rarest type, because now it's 3%. And so ENTJs, that people had no incentive to be because it wasn't the rarest, has roughly the same percentage, and same for ENFJ, surprise, surprise, right? So now ENTJ is the rarest, but between now and in 20 years' time, what's going to happen is that a lot of people are going to want to be ENTJs and will contribute to this artificial inflating of the results that ENTJ will get in 20 years' time. And because INFJs, like I said, the type is going to continue having its mystical, because there's a mystique around being the rarest type. And it just continue having that also because Carl Jung is seen as an INFJ. So we'll continue carrying that value for a while. So there's every possible reason to assume that the only type that will not have artificially inflated statistics in 20 years' time is ENFJ, because it hasn't happened to it yet. And once that happens to it in 2040, in 2060, it will be yet another type, maybe INTJ for all I know. And the process is indefinite. This projection, this desire to want to be of a particular type because it has the status of being the rarest, is a natural human phenomenon, and self-reporting, a study that bases itself on self-reporting, may not have any alternative, but nevertheless, what's going to happen is a spreading of the bias across the entire study. So what is the moral of the story? Sorry, that was a bit of a Freudian slip. In my opinion, the most reliable result is the first result, because at the time in 2000, that innate bias did not exist. People had no particular reason to want to be INFJ or INTJ or whatever that might be. Understand, I'm not trying to say this because I want, at the end of the day, for my type or the INFJ type to continue being the special one, the special unicorn, the rarest. I don't really care about this, personally. I'm only giving you my opinion as to why those numbers have changed and why I'm absolutely, well, I won't say absolutely because I'm not omniscient, but almost absolutely certain that ENTJ will no longer be the rarest in 2040 and that it's likely to be ENFJ. But we shall see. For now, that was my opinion, that was my reaction, and I would be very curious if you guys could share your thoughts on this. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, let me know. Hit a like if you enjoyed the video and consider subscribing. And don't forget about the book. See you guys.